The following episode is brought to you by Tinba, maker of bags for professional filmmakers and photographers. Tinba, never compromise. Find out more at tinba.com. You're listening to Filmmakers Drinking Bourbon. Hey, what's up, Internet? I'm Brandon.
I'm Doug.
And actually, I'm a filmmaker, but Doug, you're
I'm a master of whiskey.
You are the master of whiskey. What a crazy title.
Yeah, man.
Well, so today is a special day. We're in the podcast here at Studio B Sound Images. Doug has come up from Louisville, right?
Yep.
The heart of bourbon itself, and he is with Bulleit
Bourbon
and all of their brands, and you are actually titled the Master of Whiskey.
Yeah, I'm one of. We have a great team of masters of whiskey, but I am I am a master of whiskey.
This is the craziest thing ever.
It's great.
So Alex is actually out today. He was traveling back to Chicago to see his pops, his grandpa. So. But in his place, we've replaced with a master of whiskey, which is awesome.
Hey,
and
I'm happy to fill in.
So we're so excited. So today we actually have, for all you listening in, we have 4 different types of bourbon from the Bulleit line. Now, they might have more, but today what we have is we have the classic Frontier whiskey. We have the Bulleit Rye, which you guys are probably familiar with out there. And some of you, though, these might be newer to you. There's the aged 10-year Frontier whiskey. And then lastly, the barrel strength, or is it also considered the cask strength? What's the difference there?
Yeah, well, I mean, barrel cask, so
Okay.
2 words for the same thing, basically. Okay. But yeah, barrel strength is how we like to advertise it out there, just because it invokes the right feeling for it for us, and it's just what it says when we start talking about it. It's about that proof level being the same as it is right in the barrel before we pull it out.
All right, cool. Well, I'll tell you what, today's going to be a lot of fun. We've had other people on the show from other bourbon brands. We've heard the story of bourbon. You guys know, if you're listeners, you know that bourbon doesn't have to come from Kentucky. It just has to be 51% corn mash. It has to be in the United States. It has to be aged in a single oak barrel. Am I right?
That's right.
Okay, so those are the criteria. So those out there that say it has to be in Kentucky, you're technically wrong, although some of the greatest bourbons come from Kentucky.
That's right.
But there are also some great bourbons out of Kentucky.
Yeah, you can do it anywhere in the U.S.
Yeah,
as long as you follow all those guidelines.
Okay, awesome. So the thing that's going to be really exciting about today's show is I want Doug to help all of us amateur bourbon filmmakers to feel more confident with how do we talk about bourbon? How do we drink bourbon? How do we understand what we're tasting? How do we breathe it in? How do we, get the nodes? All that stuff that you see in the magazines and the movies. And I'm tired of feeling like a schmuck, And so just to give you guys all a little bit of background, I first met Doug. I was invited to go down to the Bulleit Bourbon event in Louisville during the Oaks, or the Kentucky Derby. And they put on this great event. There was a food, there was a tent, there was a live band, and Doug was there curating this tasting of the Bulleit Bourbon 22-year and that special 24-year,
right?
Which only the group there that night got to taste.
That was it. Yeah.
And you did such a great job of helping us understand this sort of thing. So let's just jump into it here. Let's start with the classic. Everyone's had the Bulleit Frontier whiskey.
Okay.
So let's talk me through it from the pour to the sip.
All right. Well, I mean, first, I think really confidence is all you need when it comes to ordering bourbon. You know what I mean? You talk about being able to just have the swagger. As long as you know that's what you want and that's how you want to drink it, order it that way. That's my number one rule when it comes to drinking whiskey, is that as long as you know that that's how you like it, don't let anyone tell you anything otherwise.
So today we're trying everything neat, just straight up, no ice. We want to really taste the flavors.
Yeah.
So you've poured us a little bit here. So what's the first thing I want to do when I'm tasting a bourbon?
Well, the first thing you want to do when you're tasting the bourbon is know what you just ordered, right?
Okay.
So we just ordered the Bulleit Bourbon, right? So you're going to know, or I'm going to tell you right now, right? When Bulleit is known for the fact that it's an iconic mash bill. So it's a very high rye content mash, which is why it's such a great bourbon for like classic cocktails and things like that. It's used so well because when you say that at least 51% corn, most bourbons are much higher, right? So we're talking 2/3 corn to 1/3 rye in the mash.
Gotcha.
So over 25% For sure. We're looking at really it's upwards of about 28%, 68-28 is what we're looking at for that.
Now, from a flavor standpoint, what is that aspect, that mash bill, what is it doing to the flavor? Is that what's producing the sweetness or less sweetness? Talk about that.
Exactly. So, I mean, when you think about what you're ordering, if you think about the mash first off, whether it's a bourbon versus other whiskeys, whatever it is, if you know what it's made from, what that source of fermentable sugar, that grain is, you're going to get an idea of what the flavor is going to be. So, high corn content bourbons in general, think cornbread. A little bit sweeter in flavor, creamier, where if you're going to order a rye whiskey or something with a lot of rye in it, think rye bread. Real easy, you know you're going to get dryness, spiciness, earthiness, maybe a little bit of a floral nose to it. All that stuff is coming into it. So when you have something like Bulleit Bourbon where you still have a lot of corn, but you know that you've got a lot of rye in that mash, you know you're going to have a much spicier quality. It's going to be way on that far end of the spectrum in bourbons, whereas not a sweeter bourbon, but definitely a spicier, drier bourbon on the spectrum.
Okay. Now, what about the aging on this particular expression, the Bulleit Bourbon Frontier Standard? How long is it aged? Does it ever switch barrels? Talk about that.
Yeah. So with Bulleit Bourbon, we're looking at a 5 to 7 year old age range on that. All right, and it's a bourbon that is crafted to have this specific flavor profile, which is why we have a range of barrels that we'll pull from. It's not just one age. It's not a single barrel. We're pulling from a range because what's most important is that mash bill and that flavor profile that you're getting from it.
Right.
So it's also 90 proof, which is a great proof level for cocktails or just to be able to appreciate neat, like we're going to do.
So let's talk about the, let's keep with understanding the flavor. The aging in the barrel.
Yeah.
Is doing what to the flavor? Because the minimum is 36 months, is that right? For it to be officially bourbon, or no?
No. So that's the thing. When you're talking about bourbon, you have to start to evaluate that label overall. So a straight bourbon versus a bourbon. A bourbon has to be aged in a new oak container. It doesn't even actually say cask in the regulations. New oak container. That has to be. It just has to touch it. You could basically distill it, carry it in a wooden charred oak bucket across, and pour it into a barrel and be bourbon.
Gotcha.
Spend some time in there. But as far as straight bourbons, you start to have regulations on how long they have to be. It has to be at least 2 years in those new charred American oak barrels.
Gotcha.
And that still could be a container. It's just everybody uses barrels for a lot of different reasons.
And then there's the bonded. Which is it's the government held, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So you start to have even more regulation on that, and that also is going to be 100 proof, where we're looking at 90 proof here.
So in the barrel, the time that it sits in the barrel affects the flavor profile.
100%.
In what way? So if the mash bill is more about sweetness and spiciness, the barrel length is gonna give us what in the flavor.
So the more time it spends with the barrel, the more it's going to interact with the composition of the wood itself, right? So oak is comprised of basically cellulose, hemicellulose, all these compounds within the oak that are pulling in all sorts of flavor. So when you think about what oak is doing, it's about vanilla, it's about tannin, it's about all these things that are pulling out of the oak. And the longer it has to interact with the actual heart of the wood, the more it's going to pull that into the whiskey itself.
So you get to that. Now, would you say that it becomes woody? At some point, or smoky?
At some point it will, and that's the art of making a good bourbon, is the idea of knowing when to pull it out of the barrel, because you don't want the barrel to overpower all the work you did in the distillery beforehand.
Gotcha.
And that's a big part
of
it. So
you've got the mash bill, you've got the yeast that went into the initial mix, you got all that going in the liquid, you've got the barrel, it's aged, you finally pull it out.
Right.
So now we're at the place where we pour it in the glass. So what are we looking at? And then let's take me through what's the best way for me to really appreciate a drink.
Yeah, sure. So the first thing you're going to do, and even though we're on radio here, you've got the idea that you can look at the color.
Yeah, and it's a nice sort of caramel,
golden to amber is what you're looking for. All of that color is coming from the barrel. If anyone has ever had the opportunity to go to a distillery and you see like White Dog, New Make Spirit, it's all clear. It could be vodka for all you know when it's sitting in the glass, besides when you smell it. But all this beautiful color that everyone knows for bourbon is coming out of the barrel, and it's giving you structure.
Right.
So after you look at the color, that after you have sight, it's going to be smell is next.
Okay.
Now there's a big thing about smell is that you have to realize that smelling a high proof spirit like this at 90 proof is not like smelling a wine or a beer. Where you're able to get aromas, but you can really access them because the alcohol level's so low. When you have it this high, you're going to have a lot of alcohol vapor that's coming off the top of the glass, and that could burn your palate pretty much. So you want to make sure that when you're nosing it, I always keep my mouth open when you're breathing in through your nose. It's allowing you to ventilate a little bit and really access a lot of those aromas coming
Okay, so mouth open, like how wide? Are we talking like eat the glass wide or just enough?
Just a crack. Just
enough.
Just kind of open it up just a little bit to really, as you're breathing in, you're allowing
there's
it to
something
come
happening there,
Right. And the last thing you want to do is allow the alcohol to overpower your sense of smell, because smell is such an important part of taste overall that you can just kind of kill the experience to start.
Okay, so once we get the little breathe in, then you take the sip?
Right. After you get the aromas and you start to smell some of that sweetness, for me, I get a little bit of a spice coming off this, but a lot of it's still about that corn. I get this like sweet and caramel kind of nose coming right off the top, and then you taste it. But when you take a sip, the first one, I always say, because this is my first whiskey of the day. Yeah. It may be yours.
Yeah. Well, here on Filmmakers Drinking Bourbon, we're always one or two deep.
But it's you want to acclimate your palate. So that first one, you're getting that shock of all that alcohol still. So you want to take one sip, go ahead and swallow that one, and then on that second one, you'll be able to keep it in your mouth a little bit longer and go ahead to get it all over your tongue to be able to appreciate that flavor and savor it a little bit more.
Let's try it. Here we got to cheers first.
Cheers.
All right, here we go.
So that first one, you still get a lot of flavor, but you get the shock, right? Sure. Immediately you get that high proof spirit is going to come through. Now you start to get acclimated.
Now, does the proof affect what I would call is that what I'm calling the burn factor?
Yeah.
So the higher the proof, the more I feel the burn.
Right. For the most part, and I think it's really on your tongue itself, and it's almost, again, what you're getting through your olfactory, so the idea that you're still getting a lot of those alcohol vapors that are coming through, all through there.
And then you start to feel it trail a little.
Yeah, you feel it trail, but I think that finish sometimes is attributed to high proof when other times it can be impurities in the whiskey. You know what I mean? A very smooth whiskey that's still very high in proof shouldn't have that like
a real
chest
heavy
burn.
Yeah, real heavy
It's
burn.
going to happen in the back of your palate, but it's not going to continue on, and that's where you get those like smooth finish whiskeys that are still high proof, just made very well.
So potentially some plastic bottle experiences could have a little more burn factor.
Could have more burn factor,
which you might like. Right. Somebody might want that.
If that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that are into that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Well, this is great. I really think, let's just, anything else in this specific with the Frontier whiskey that you would, if you were curating, you'd say, look for this, taste this. So you mentioned the vanilla, you mentioned some of that. Is there anything else that's in there? I mean, any secret recipes you can divulge at this point?
Well, for me, this Bulleit Bourbon is the perfect balance between that sweetness, right? The corn, you get a little bit of that kind of sugary sweetness. You get that vanilla. But right in the middle of my palate, immediately I get dryness that comes right through.
Yep. And
that is why I love to be able to take something like Bulleit Bourbon and apply it to classic cocktails that a lot of times call for rye. And I think that's what I can attribute and we can say is a lot of the success of this brand is the fact that it's so applicable to so many different types of drinks that are very popular right now. And you can order a Bulleit Bourbon Manhattan, and it's going to be dry enough to hold up to the vermouth, to the bitters, everything you're putting into that drink. You're going to be able to have it there, and it's going to be the right building block.
Wonderful. Excellent. Well, I want to encourage everybody listening, or if you're on the Slack group, if you're tuning in, chime in if you have any questions for Doug along the way. We'll happy to answer those. So I think the guy, somebody chimed in, said his volume's a little low. So maybe just get a little. No, I think it's more of a proximity issue. Just make sure you're a little there. You go. There you go. All right. So guys, if you want to chime in, feel free to chime in, and we'll try to get to your questions. Cool. As we go through. All right, well, great. Well, let's. I'm going to finish this guy off here and enjoy this one.
All right.
If you guys are, as long as you're at home and you're not driving or anything like that, we encourage you to sip along with us.
Yeah.
Man, that's just good. The thing I love about the classic Frontier Bulleit is it's got enough. It's just a good pour. You know what I mean? Like, you don't need much, No. I mean, maybe if you want to throw some rocks in it, but other than that, it's got that sort of sweet. It's almost like, some people who want that sweetness will go for an old fashioned.
Right.
But Bulleit, you can almost just pour it straight up and you get, it doesn't taste like an old fashioned, but you get some of those attributes of that sweet sort of cocktail sort of.
Oh yeah, you get the balance.
Vibe.
And that's what, cocktails are all about balancing flavor. And the great thing about a whiskey like this is that it has that balance right there. The rye and the corn balance so well in the glass just to start off. Now, I would say adding a little water is always a nice thing to do. Yeah. It brings it down to whatever proof level you want it to be.
Sure.
And so, we put this in the bottle at 90 proof. But if you want to just add a little bit of water to open it up, there's nothing wrong with that. A couple rocks, it just brings down the proof level a little bit, makes it a little more accessible, sippable, all that kind of stuff.
All right, cool. Well, I'm going to cleanse the palate here with a little bit of water, and then I'm going to propose we move to the rye because I want to do this sort of as a challenge.
Okay.
I've heard a lot of people have had this argument. No one can really taste the difference between rye and bourbon. There's sort of the rye versus bourbon debate. Is that an ongoing debate you hear with the enthusiast of why is bourbon got real hot, but now it seems like rye is becoming popular? Talk about the difference.
I mean, I wouldn't put it as a challenge. I think for me, it's what I want to use it for or what I'm in the mood for. I mean, the great thing about Bulleit Bourbon is that it was, and even for me personally, it was my gateway into rye whiskey. Rye is a category and a type of whiskey that sometimes is a little hard to take. I mean, it's aggressive. That's what that spice is really doing to it. And that grain really gives you that very spicy, very upfront aggression. And Bulleit Bourbons that kind of step into that category, and then you continue on. So I can see how you can get similarities between these two, but for the category overall, I think they're very separate.
All right. Well, I'm gonna see if I can apply what I've learned. Okay. So I'm gonna talk this through, and then you kind of tell me how well I did. Okay.
All right.
So right now we've got the rye. I'm looking at it. It looks a little lighter in color to me, to be honest. I don't know if that's a good assumption or not.
I think it's great.
It looks a little lighter in color, not quite as rich and caramely as the Frontier whiskey.
Yeah.
And I might be stretching here a little bit, but it appears maybe a little thinner.
Oh yeah. Okay. I think doing swirling around the glass a little bit, you can see. There's a possibility that it is a little bit thinner, but that's actually the first time I've heard it. But I wouldn't argue with you.
All right. So I'm kind of taking it up a notch here. All right, so I'm going to breathe this in. Immediately, you get it more spicy. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no doubt about it.
And for me, it's almost like there's a little bit of a floral quality to it, even above and beyond. The sweetness isn't there as much, which is almost like that creamy sweetness isn't there as much. So I think there's more spice. It's a little bit thinner in the aroma, but in a really good way.
It definitely has more of what I would call burn factor. Mm-hmm. I feel. Is that because of the spiciness, I would assume?
100%.
Yeah.
I like to...
I can taste the dryness. There's a more... It's because I'm used to drinking bourbon. Obviously, we have a podcast that's about bourbon. Yeah. So I normally drink bourbon, and immediately this puts me in that place of like a Scotch.
Okay.
That's more dry, more of a when you drink a Jameson or any of the Glenfiddich, it's got a different experience.
100%. And it's the grain. I mean, that's definitely the fact that the lack of corn is giving you a completely different mouthfeel.
Yeah.
Right off the bat. You get this dryness that lingers a whole lot longer with the rye. Now, I usually like to describe in a very loving way, because I love rye whiskey, that drinking rye is kind of like drinking a punch in the face. Because it's very upfront aggressive. It hits your palate and it stays right there.
Yeah.
And then you can continue to let it linger afterwards.
Now, is this particular one, is it aged? How is it aged? What are the rules on it? We have we talk about bourbon here on the show. We don't know what the rules are for rye. Is there rules?
Yeah, there are. So the federal government lays out the same. Basically, it's the same type of rules for bourbon whiskey as it is so a straight bourbon whiskey versus straight rye. But you're basically substituting rye as the grain in for all of those factors.
So is it still 51%?
It's still at least 51% rye. This is 95% rye. And most ryes you find out there, especially what we see today, is high rye content ryes. So you're looking at 95%, 90%, very much higher, because you do want to separate them out from the bourbon category and really highlight and accentuate those flavors.
And how long is that one stored? Is it aged as long, or?
So our rye is actually, the age range on our rye is about 4 to 6 years instead of the 5 to 7 year range. So slightly different, but it's still there's overlap. So you can see that like 5-6 range is a really good range for our whiskeys, and I think it brings out the right amount of oak influence.
Okay, so it sounds to me like, and maybe until we get in, we'll move to the 10-year next. Mm-hmm. But it seems like a lot of people, they're always like, oh, it's this 25, 28, 30 year. It's it's been aged forever. Like, is there some mythology to that? Is it not always better if it's older?
Definitely not. Especially with bourbon. I mean, you also have to consider, a lot of people think of that because of the Scotch whiskey and single malt Scotch market in general. So you think to yourself, okay, I see a 25-year-old Scotch. Well, you have to realize that 25-year-old label on that bottle is actually saying the oldest whiskey that goes into that bottle is 25 years old. When it comes to bourbon and in the federal government regulations for bourbons, the youngest whiskey in the bottle is what you have to put on the label. So if we're going to put that Bulleit 10 years, we get to that. That's the youngest whiskey that goes in when in fact, you're actually looking at a 10 to 12-year-old range.
Okay.
As far as what goes in there.
All right. So on the 10-year, is this liquid, and I guess this is the question I've always wondered, is this the same liquid as the Frontier bourbon, but just aged longer?
Exactly.
Is that how it works?
That's how it works. That's how it works for us.
Okay.
We have basically all we're letting some of the bourbons that are selected out there rest a little bit longer.
Gotcha. So when it comes out of the pot and it's the clear liquid, you guys use copper?
Yeah, copper still.
So when it comes out of the still and it's clear liquid,
right?
That's the liquid.
And
then
liquid.
Based on the barrels and the aging and all of that stuff, that's going to determine everything else.
Right. So we're using all the same whiskeys as far as what is being aged and laid down, and when it goes into the barrel, it can be and become, whether it's the Bulleit 10-year or the Bulleit bourbon itself, it's about monitoring it and seeing what we think the influence of the oak is happening to the whiskey and where we're going to apply it down the road.
Now, is all of this made at the distillery down in Louisville, or where do you guys age all of this stuff at?
So for Bulleit Bourbon, we're in the process. We've almost finished actually a brand new Bulleit Distilling Company distillery out in Shelby County in Kentucky. Okay. So we're really excited about that.
That's down by, is that by Jim Beam? Shelby County?
Shelby County. No, Beam is actually going to be south of Louisville, where Shelby is going to be going east, back east.
Gotcha.
So it's going to be off of the 64 corridor instead of the 75 corridor. So the Bulleit Distilling Company will be up and running here hopefully by the end of the year. And then everything for Bulleit that goes in the bottle will be made there. Now, currently, we've got contractual sources in which we purchase and then bottle. We purchase, age right now at the Stitzelweller distillery down in Shively, Kentucky.
Right.
And we also have our bottling line there. So we age and bottle in Louisville or in Shively, but everything is contractually sourced.
Gotcha. Yeah, so this one, looks, again, very similar to the Frontier whiskey.
Yeah, a little bit. For me, it's a little bit darker, and you can definitely see it when you put the bottles next to each other, as opposed to a little bit in glass.
And again, back to that's more of a sweetness. It's a little more subtle. Yep. It's almost like, to me, if I'm introducing somebody to whiskey for the first time, I'm not going with a rye. That could put them off. It's a little harsh.
100%.
And this is a little smoother. So let's try this. Oh, now I feel like I taste more of the wood.
100%. You should.
I definitely taste more of the barrel, whatever it is, and I would describe it almost as smoky. Is that a good description?
It's a good description. It's a description
because the barrels are charred, right?
Charred barrels. So you do have that influence. A lot of that char is actually, so what it's doing is it's pulling wood sugars out to the surface. So you get a sweetness that comes through from the charred barrels as well. But I think smoky is a good description with bourbon. It's just always confused with the same smoky terminology that people apply to Scotch, which is so different.
Totally different, yeah.
Totally different. And so that's the only reason sometimes I hesitate using smoky is because people are going to think peat smoke. They're going to think Scotch whiskey. But there's a almost that charred grittiness that comes off of spending more time in the barrel, more interaction with the oak. There's also more structure there. So, I mean, you usually...
You've said the word structure a couple times. Right. What do you mean by that?
Well, so there's two things for me that really influence whiskey for structure. It's mouthfeel is what I'm talking about. So like the fact that it coats your mouth on a larger scale. And it's coming from the alcohol level, the proof, giving you astringency. It's also coming from the tannin, the same kind of tannin that we talk about when we talk about wine. You're talking about that astringency that comes out, that dryness. Mm-hmm. But for me, that adds more access to the flavor because it does coat your full palate and it sits there longer. You're able to taste more.
Yeah. Yeah, it lingers and has a nice little deal. So now let's pause for a minute. At this point, what are we, as far as you guys positioned in the marketplace? The Frontier is definitely accessible, right? It's not the cheapest on the market, but it's not this $70 a bottle. It's where are you guys priced at now with the Bulleit?
So, I look at national averages as far as, I don't like to quote, market to market, but you're looking at probably, you can find the Bulleit Bourbon on the shelf for, $32.99. Sometimes it's a little bit lower than that, but it's right around that low 30 range, high 20 if it's on sale.
Right, which I would call accessible. I mean, most 100%. People can, for me, so I'm, I typically am like, I don't, once you get over that $50, there's something for me about $50 where it's like, man, that's a
benchmark in the bourbon world.
There's that's a 50, I'm spending $65, this needs to be good,
on a consumed item.
I'm not, Mr. Moneybags, I don't think a lot of people are in America, so I think that's great that you guys offer that. Now, what is that similar with the rye?
The rye, typically you find it for maybe a couple dollars more on the shelf.
Now, is that for you guys? Is that by design, strategic to kind of win in the marketplace? And who do you guys view as sort of your competitors? Are you going up against more of the household names of the Makers and the Beams? Are you guys trying to compete against a higher end or?
I think Makers is probably in that realm as far as that kind of premium whiskey category. I mean, it's a name everybody knows, so it's a very easy benchmark to kind of apply ourselves against.
Yeah.
But it's the flavor profile is so different. I hate to try to compare besides price because of the fact that Maker's Mark's usually my benchmark to say it's the other end of the spectrum. If you want that, they use wheat in their mash bill instead. I mean, if you want that lighter style, sweeter bourbons, that's the direction you're going to go. And for Bulleit, if you want that drier, spicier quality to it, you're going to go towards us. And that's why I say it's on the other end of the spectrum.
Now, as far as spectrum, where does the 10-year fall in? Because it ages longer, is that now more premium? Is it valuable? Can you correlate the age of a bourbon or a whiskey to a price point?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, think about it just as simple as the rent basically that bottle is paying to sit in the warehouse.
So there's some economics there.
Yeah, the cost to store it longer is going to affect the price. So older bourbons are almost always going to be more expensive. But it's also because the quality level should be increasing if you're releasing it at the right age statement for your product. So I mean, the Bulleit 10-year-old is more expensive. You're looking closer to the $50 range.
Sure.
And that has a lot to do with the fact that there's more care taken into how long it's staying in that barrel, aging and becoming of age, if you will, to come out in that bottle.
Now, let's get into this barrel strength. I'm excited. I've never had the barrels. I've actually never had the 10-year. That was really good. Let's talk about this barrel strength. What's unique about that? Why is this stuff? It looks like it's marketed to kind of have a little kick, a little punch to it.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of hardcore.
Yeah, I mean, everything about this bottle is unique in the fact that, it's still the iconic Frontier Whiskey Bulleit Bourbon bottle that people know, that kind of old Frontier medicine style bottle. But with that black label, it kind of pops out. And the fact that you read right on the label. And this is, as far as tips, this is one of the other things I always recommend people do is, if you're at a bar or if you're at a liquor store, look at the label, read it. Read what's going on because we're going to tell you. One of the greatest things about labeling laws is that you can't lie on the label. You have to tell the truth, right? So we're putting on there uncut, limited bottling. Right away that we're taking more care into it. Limited bottling. This is only going to be around for so long. And right now, this is only available in the state of Kentucky.
Wow.
Only place you can buy.
So we're on a hot deal here.
Yeah. So luckily, we're really close to the state of Kentucky right now.
Yeah. Well, you guys have been so kind to allow us to try this stuff and send us the samples. All right. So this is going to have a little more kick to it.
For sure. Okay. So, when you think about it, before we drink it, uncut, right? So basically what this is Bulleit Bourbon.
Yep.
That Frontier whiskey that we tasted first. But when we take it out of the barrel, we're not cutting it with water afterwards. So we're dumping all those barrels, and that's what that uncut is. So typically, to get it down to 90 proof, you're adding water, which is why it's always kind of a fallacy for people to say, don't add water to your whiskey. You're going to ruin it.
Because they already do.
Yeah, we've already added water at least 3 times in the process before it got to you. But so uncut means we're not cutting it back down, and that's why we've got a higher proof level on this than and then that 90 proof. The Bulleit 10-year was 91.2. And when you look at this one here for the Bulleit barrel strength, you're looking at 119.4.
Sure. So we're beyond 100%.
Beyond.
This is like an A+ plus. It's like a B, whatever's beyond an A plus, right?
Right. Well, so when you think about proof levels, you have to cut that in half to look at what the actual percent of alcohol by volume is. So 119 proof, and I always have to look back down here because I'm terrible at math, which is why I work in whiskey.
Me too.
59.7.
Okay.
Right. That's going to be the alcohol by volume in this bottle. That's how much actual alcohol is in here.
Sure.
But over 100 proof, I mean, that's over 50%. You're looking at a very high amount of alcohol. But this comes back to that structure, astringency, giving us more access to all the flavors. This is just punching up all the flavor that we love about the Bulleit Bourbon in this bottle.
Well, it's definitely, from a look, it's darker.
Right.
So that's obvious.
Yeah, just, I mean, you think...
And I think I'm noticing thickness. And I know...
Yeah,
maybe I'm operating at a higher level here, Doug. Yeah. You know what I mean?
You're going to get the next Master of Whiskey title.
Maybe because, my medium is visual as a filmmaker, but I feel like this one is thicker, and I can notice it.
Well, I would definitely agree with that for this one, because you think about, you're cutting water back. So the viscosity of the spirit is going to reduce from the Bulleit Bourbons here. So just thinking about reducing the spirit down to 90 proof versus this 119, you are going to cut it. So I would 100% agree for this one on that.
Well, let's get in it. Let's try this.
Try it.
Oh yeah! Wow, you can. It's
an evolution of the face you make.
Absolutely. So this one, if you're listening, this bourbon has such a structure, right? So and it's got a strength to it that not only do you get the flavor, but you get the power. Like you get the full weight of it.
Yeah, it lingers everywhere in your mouth. When you taste this, it's present. It's very much there. And it just accentuates everything. I love this whiskey.
That's great.
It's great. And
so let's talk at this point. Let's talk pairings.
Okay.
So we've got these 4 great expressions. We've got the standard frontier bourbon. We've got the rye. We've got the 10-year, and we've got the barrel strength. When is it best to drink these? Like when you're recommending for someone, hey, you've got these in your arsenal,
right?
What are the times where you're like, you know what, tonight's more of a barrel night versus, tonight I'm going to have the frontier. Man, that really stays in the back of your neck.
Yeah.
Back of your throat. It's just there.
It sits for a while. Well, with the Bulleit Bourbon, I think the classic for me with that is, it makes some classic cocktails very, very well. That would be my everyday bourbon. You know what I mean? This is going to be the one I grab, at least 3 out of every 5 times that I'm going for a bottle, I think would be the Bulleit Bourbon, because it's got the right balance. You can mix it really, really well, whether you're doing a Manhattan or
old fashioned,
or really for me, like right now in the summertime, things like ginger beer, a little bit of lemon, kind of like a Kentucky Buck style. Yeah, it really just the sweetness of bourbons with a little bit of spice that accentuates with something like ginger beer. That's what I go for.
What we've been making at the house recently? Have you had a Kentucky mimosa?
No.
Oh man! So I'm gonna. If you're listening, you guys got to try this. So over 4th of July, I found this recipe, and it's basically a bourbon mimosa.
Okay.
So you go. Off the top of my head, it's like a 1/3 cup of water with a 1/3 cup of sugar. You make a simple syrup,
right?
And you get that to a boil. Then you throw in like 6 sage leaves. And you seep for about 5 minutes. It brings in some of that minty freshness sort of feel to it.
While you're making the syrup?
Once the syrup is done boiling, you turn it off boil.
Okay.
Set it aside. Seep with the lid on. 5 minutes. Pull the sage leaves out. Now you have your simple syrup. You take that, you pour that into a pitcher. Now you add like a 1/3 cup of club soda. You add a 1/3 cup of, or a cup of orange juice.
Okay.
And a 1/3 cup to a cup, how strong you want it, bourbon. Mix it up.
Okay.
Pour on ice.
Delicious.
It is unbelievably delicious. It's better than any mimosa I've ever had. My wife is not even really a bourbon drinker. She doesn't really, if I handed her one of these, especially the barrel strength or even the frontier, she would just be like, whoa, that's overwhelming.
Yeah.
She couldn't get enough. She was like, keep it coming.
Nice.
It's smooth, but you can taste the bourbon. But there's that morning freshness of the OJ, and then that simple syrup gives it this little bit of this like mystical minty, and then just a little of that club soda. It's effervescent. Nice. It's good.
All right, I got my Sunday drink.
Yeah, you got to try it.
I'll try it this Sunday. That sounds great.
It's good. So
it's fantastic.
So you got your everyday sipper. What about the rye? At what point are you like, man, we got to go rye?
Well, that's kind of it's always kind of a constant struggle because I do really love the dryness of rye. But that is going to be when I want to do, classic drinks. I actually really like a Boulevardier with rye.
Okay.
Or some of those other kind of boozy stirred cocktails. That's going to be my order. That's typically my order out too.
Okay.
So where the Bulleit Bourbon home, you know what I mean? This is what I'm going to go for. I know that whoever I'm entertaining with is going to love it. The Bulleit Rye is usually what I'm going to go for. It's actually the number one called for rye in the U.S. right now.
Sure.
So I mean that's what I'm going to go for when I'm out in the market and I'm out at a good bar.
And speaking of market and out at bars, you guys have seemed to have captured this sort of like hipster moment. A bullet and a beer. I mean, it's kind of the thing. Anyone in their 20s to 30s. I mean, used to in the day it was Maker's Mark or it was some of these other more been around forever, Beam and whatever. But anymore, Bulleit is kind of like just rolls off the tongue. It's become very popular with a younger audience. Is there what's the reason behind that?
Well, I would attribute that a lot to the fact that when Tom Bulleit started this brand, it was all about him. He was an entrepreneur that went out on his own when he decided to leave his law practice and was basically knocking on doors. And his main focus was what he called his partners in chemistry. It was the bartenders, and really going to them and getting them and talking to them and becoming like connected with them in order to get them to appreciate the product for what it was. And I think that really is transferred into a crowd that is, you look at the younger, the hipster crowd, whatever you want to call it. They appreciate that quality level of drinks when you go out, and when they go out, they want like 2 really good cocktails instead of 4 cocktails. You know what I mean? So you're going for a quality level, and that's what's available. And I think it's because it's been adopted by the trade.
Yeah,
and
there's nothing worse than going to like a B-level bar that just splashes in club soda and makes just a watered down, nasty old fashioned. You're just like, come on.
Yeah, if you're going to order an old fashioned, you want to know that you got the right ingredients.
And if it's a special drink, you want it to be special.
Exactly.
So we just had a guy chime in, Brian Wilcox. He's one of our listeners. He's on the Slack channel. He says, speaking of cocktails, I've done a really good Bulleit rye drink. 2 ounces Bulleit rye, 1 ounce fresh OJ, teaspoon of fresh honey, 3 drops Angostura bitters, and a twig of rosemary.
Oh, wow. Nice. Stepping it up.
We'll call that the Wilcox.
There we go.
Pour you a Wilcox. So that sounds good. Now, what about the 10-year? Is that like
that's like your special occasion for me. You know what I mean? That's what I'm going to be. Yeah, well, it's like, all right, you know what? After dinner, sit down and relax. You pour yourself maybe like 1 ice cube with a 10-year-old. That's that occasion. You're not going to pull this out for everybody. Hey, when you have the right moment.
It's that moment where you just closed the deal
exactly
with your business, or you bought a new car, you're pregnant, whatever it is, and you're like, tonight it's the 10-year.
We're going for 10-year tonight.
Nice,
exactly,
awesome,
exactly.
Cool. And then what about the barrel strength?
The barrel strength
is that like bachelor party?
That's. I mean, the barrel strength for me. I mean, this is the. A lot of people are calling for it in bars and putting them in drinks, but for me, it's like the connoisseurs like go-to. It's like, oh, you want to chase something really special. Not that it's special occasion, but someone that's going to appreciate the quality level and the that higher proof. Not everyone that you have over, you're going to be like, hey, you want to try this 119 proof?
Sure.
They're going to be like, ooh. But the right person that comes over, it's like,
Yeah,
it's like you come over, we're gonna drink barrel strength.
It's like beer drinkers who like hops.
Right.
They want to feel it, live it, breathe it, and they want to be in the hops and want to drink their beer to have a punch. To whereas the occasional beer drinker's like, give me a Busch Light.
Right.
Like I'm here to watch the game. Give me the Busch Light.
Right.
Same way. If you really want to enjoy that, if you're a social bourbon drinker, it's give me an old fashioned. Light on the bourbon, if you're not used to it, and then to whereas with the barrel strength, like you got to know what you're getting into, otherwise you're going to be overwhelmed.
You have to know what you're appreciating, and like you said, what was the first reaction you had? You're like, whoa, there's a big difference between those, and that proof level just really hops up, and it'll give you a really big difference.
So I'm getting back into the 10-year here because that was really good. So, well, I'll tell you what, man, this has been really interesting. A lot of fun to talk about the ins and outs of bourbon, how to drink it, how to pour it. Is there any other tips, any other things our listeners, again, we're, mainly, amateurs at this sort of deal. If somebody's wanting to kind of take the next step in sort of their appreciation for bourbon? Any publications, any books, any other spirits that are interesting, or any other expressions that are out there that they might want to try to experience? Are there bourbon clubs? What else do you know that we need to know?
I mean, I think it really the best place and one of the best resources for anyone, even if you don't have the income to really like start purchasing a bunch of books, go to classes, join clubs. Your whiskey bar, or actually, I personally think, if you go to one of your favorite liquor stores that's like a whiskey-centric shop, your whiskey shop, not just your liquor store, and you start just chatting up the folks, because there's no one better in that you can have access to that knows their stuff more than a lot of people that really are like take pride. And when you walk into that bar and you see that whiskey list, you know that the person that cultivated that list is just a diehard fan. Having a good conversation with the bartender about whiskey, go at 4:30 or 5 o'clock right when they open, have a seat at the bar, start talking to them about it. Even, I think it's great to be open with them and say, hey, listen, I'm not sure what I want. I see you guys have tons of whiskey. What do you think we should do here? And you're going to have such a good conversation with someone that's just, that industry. They really love what they're doing. And I think that's such a good resource. Yeah,
it's cool. I think it's just been a lot of fun, especially on the show. It makes for such a great icebreaker, and just kind of gets the conversation started. Oh, what are you drinking? Oh, where's that made? And you get there's an art form behind it, and there's a culture, which is just a lot of fun, But the other thing, of course, that we talk about here is filmmaking. So our listeners, they're used to hearing camera talk, film talk, that sort of stuff. So today's been a special episode for them. They're getting a lot more of that bourbon talk, but we need to know. First of all, before we set this up, a master of whiskey. Right. This is no joke. Like you're a master.
Right.
This is great. So speaking as a master of whiskey, what kind of film and TV and what are you watching? That's one of our big questions. What are you watching?
Oh man, I would say
because when you're drinking bourbon, you're doing something. You're either around the fire, you're hanging out with the neighbors, or you're watching something.
Right. I am. I'm as far as like TV and film, especially TV. I'm one of these like I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to TV, and my wife always gets upset with me because I'm this like if we start a show, whatever it is, recommendation on anyone, it's like I got to go back to the beginning. I got to start at the beginning, and she's like, "Come on, really? It's a sitcom." I was like, "No, I don't care. Character development. I'm going back to the beginning." So I mean, in some of my all-time favorites for showing my nerddom as far as TV is like I'm a huge Lost fan. I've always been. You know what I mean?
Abrams.
Yeah,
Now, where were you on? How did you feel about the finale of that? Because a lot of people. Now, I'll confess, I never watched it.
Oh yeah,
never watched it. Everybody was upset at the end, and then I was like, I'm not going back to watch this thing. So
I guess I'm a little lenient, you know what I mean? I was invested enough that just coming to some sort of end to me was good. Of course, I've also, I'm also a rewatcher.
Okay.
So I probably watch the season, when I travel a lot. So like I'm constantly like I want a show that I can dive into for a long period of time when I'm on the road, Netflix, whatever it is, on my iPad, on airplanes. So that's really a good one to get into. But I mean, I was happy with it.
Nice.
I had no problems. I wasn't one of these like stand up. I'm never watching anything that they do again.
Yeah.
No.
I think you and Alex would share that same bit because he watched it and then just recently, like last year, he watched it again. He binged it again.
Okay.
And he enjoyed it. So I haven't seen it. So any other shows? What other shows have you? Anything that's popped up recently that you're like, oh, that's kind of interesting?
Well, you know what I mean. And this is where I guess I'm pretty mainstream on what's super popular right now. I mean, just finally got the courage up, my wife and I, to start watching the previous season of House of Cards, which I'm very happy.
Oh, so good.
Yeah, which is so great. We've got a couple episodes to finish off. Yeah. But I'm so happy.
So you haven't watched the newest season?
We're the one that just launched out, right? They just
the one that just finished.
We're not finished with it.
Okay, but you're in it. Okay,
we're in it.
You're in it,
which I'm so happy about because the development of this one is it's getting back to some things.
Great. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and that show from the beginning has really grabbed us.
Well, and I think too that show pairs so well with bourbon because it's like classy. Like I love when him and Claire sit by the window and smoke.
Oh yeah,
and they share these powerful moments, and I love when they pour the whiskey and
it's
great.
There's so many decisions
Classic.
were made in that show. I think either I think it was the first season where there was a lot of bourbon in the first season. And that's occasional sitting by the window having a cigarette and it's resolved. Whatever was happening was resolved over that small moment of whatever they were consuming.
Yeah, that's genius. Spacey's genius. I mean, it's great stuff. Yeah. What about films? What kind of films are you into? What type of stuff do you typically like? So for one, on this show we have an ongoing debate, the superhero debate.
Oh yeah,
I hate them. I can't stand. I despise them.
Okay.
Alex is not here to speak up for himself, so he loves them.
Well, I can jump in for Alex.
And he really enjoys the idea of going and just releasing and watching just madness and craziness and cool special effects and he's cool with that. Yeah. I, on the other hand, can't stand it because I'm just like, this is not real.
Right. So for me,
where are you at?
So for me, it's I'd be in Alex's camp.
All right,
for that.
Camp Alex.
Because for example, I ended up staying up last night. Didn't realize what I was getting myself into, but I stayed up last night and finally watched the Superman versus Batman movie.
Oh
Just finally watched it. And didn't realize what I was getting myself into. And an hour in, I'm like, wow, there's still 2 hours left. Whatever it was, I was like, geez. But I'm in the same idea that I do like to get kind of lost in something, and that's where as I guess sci-fi, fantasy, all these kind of things. I do enough with work that I like to shut off of watching something and watching a film that's I can be in a different world. It's the same thing with books for me. It's I want to be transported away from everything in reality and be in something else and allow someone else's world to take over.
I will say I do make an exception for Nolan's Batman. Yeah. That's my exception because I don't think it's really I don't really think it's a superhero movie, but
Well, my one problem though is that the reboot culture is getting to the point where it's I haven't even had a time to completely fully digest the last person's character. Yeah, and you're already making me compare them to somebody else. Right. That is the hardest part. Yeah. But I guess I still break down. There's my line that I draw is whether I'm going to see it in the theater or whether I'm going to wait till I can consume it at home. Yeah, that's my line. It's I'm upset with them doing this. I'm still going to watch it at home. Yeah, but I'm not going to the theater to watch it.
What about indie flicks? You into any of the smaller films? Some of the ones that are hard to come by and maybe you don't quite know about, but you hear about and then you discover it's amazing.
Yeah, I was more before I had 3 kids. Yeah, you know what I mean. That definitely. Oh, yeah. Job and kids, I definitely got into them more where I would really seek and find. And now as a good example, my wife and I just finally got out to go see a movie for the first time in a long time. We just had twins not too long ago. Our house is chaos, and we were let's go to a movie. Last minute decision, and we actually went out and saw The Lobster.
Oh yeah, we were talking about that. I think last episode.
Yeah. So we it was my wife's recommendation. I hadn't seen a thing on it. Sure. That was one of those things where it was we went to it, we stayed through the whole thing. It was it was definitely, for me, it had all the makings of something great and I loved the characters, but at the end of it, I was I just really don't know what to say about this when I walk out of this movie theater. I have no words to say, and I'm not sure if it's a good thing, but I just have no words that I can put to what I just watched. Yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah, we'll have to I'll have to check that one out. That's one we'll have to talk about. It seems like it's catching some buzz. We watched with my family. So I've got 2 kids. I got a 13-year-old and a 7-year-old. Okay. And my wife. And so over the weekend, I said, "Hey guys, let's watch a movie." And they were like, "What are we going to watch?" And so I pulled up a movie that's been on my list that I've been wanting to see, Eddie the Eagle. I don't know how old you are, but Eddie the Eagle was a ski jumper in the '88 Olympics at Calgary. Right. And I remember it. Yeah. I remember this quirky, nerdy little guy who was a ski jumper. He wasn't great, but he was in the Olympics. And Hugh Jackman's in the film. Mm-hmm. He's his coach. And it's this great, quirky little indie film. The music is great. A lot of Hall & Oates.
Oh, really? Nice.
80s sort of wardrobe attire and jumpsuits and stuff. And nice. And it's just a fun little quirky film. My kids loved it. They're even a 7-year-old. He held his attention, and he really, because it shows him as a kid. It opens up, and the main character is Eddie the Eagle as a kid. So it's a little kid. It's real sort of funny and cute, and he's wanting to be an Olympiad, but he's not really athletic. And you follow his story all the way to the Calgary Olympics, and he's jumping the 90-meter, ski jump. Yeah. And it's awesome. Okay. It's really good. I highly recommend it. A lot of fun. But those are the films for me that are magic because they weren't made with tons of money.
Right.
And really the reason I think those films are so great to me is because it's the story that carries them.
Right.
It's the story. It has to be the story because they just don't have the money to do all this sort of extra stuff. So it's the story and it's the acting. And a lot of time you get these actors that you've never heard of.
Yeah.
And so the guy who plays Eddie the Eagle, I'd never heard of, and he was great. He was tremendous, And of course you had Hugh Jackman, which everybody knows him. But for me, it was great. So we watched that. And then what about documentary? Are you into documentary at all?
I don't, like I said, the amount of times that I actually get to sit down and end up watching them, like seeing a new movie, I haven't seen a lot. I've got a lot. I feel like there's a lot on a list of movies, documentaries that I need to see.
Yeah.
And I always, with documentaries, I always end up watching trailers for them and like getting excited about them. But then when it decision time, like crunch time comes, you're like, oh.
Dude, that's something to talk about. Yeah. Crunch time. So there's so many choices.
Yeah.
So, as a connoisseur, I mean, you're the person, so from the bourbon angle, you're the guy who creates the bourbon for us to enjoy.
Right.
From the filmmaking angle, you're the audience that we're making films for.
Yeah.
So when you're there, how do you do you and your wife have a system of picking what you're going to watch, or do you go with your gut? Sometimes I will stay up for hours just flipping through and watching trailers.
I'll do that too, and my wife gets so pissed at me for doing that. It's like, come on, let's just pick something. And I'm like, well, wait, no, let's watch one more trailer. Let's just see, hold on, which do you want to pick?
Yeah.
I used to have this, and this was like the college days kind of scenario. I used to have this great system. If you had like 4 or 5 people sitting in a room, and you're like, all right, what are we going to watch?
Right.
We used to do this elimination where everybody had to pick 2 movies. You'd put them in a pot, and then each person would get to eliminate one until you got down to the last one, and whatever that was. Just by turn, that's what we had to watch. I need to start bringing that back. But once my kids get involved, it's mainly Pixar and Disney movies, and then 3 movies that me or my wife pick that we know is still going to have content for them.
Right. So one of the things we do in my neighborhood is every now and again we have movie nights out in the driveway.
Nice.
And we'll throw it up on the garage door. And so the first one we did was Annie.
Okay.
Classic.
Right, yeah.
Hard Knock Life. You can't, I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. So, but we're really pulling out the stops for this next one. And so my neighbor JP, who he's actually going to be on the show next week, this guy he's a one of a kind, for first of all. He still watches VHS. His dad is a big movie lover. His dad will give him a box of VHS tapes and say, here's the next movies you need to watch. And so at lunchtime, he goes through and his goal is to watch 100 movies this year.
Wow.
And he's already at 50. So it's crazy. So anyway, JP, he's a good friend of mine. So we decided the next big movie night, and we'll see. How old are you? Are you in your...
I'll be 35 in August.
Okay, 35. So you might remember this. There was a movie back in the day called Breakin' and Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo. Do you remember these?
No.
Okay. So these are
intrigued.
breakdance movies from the 80s.
Awesome.
Okay, birthed out of the 70s, early hip hop movement into the 80s. And so we're going to have a double feature, Breakin' and Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo, and these are just completely about breakdancing. They're amazing. The outfits are amazing. The music is awesome. I mean, it's all like and they're like, hey man, watch my moves. And it's just like breakdancing. It's awesome. Parachute pants, the whole deal. Yeah. And then once the kids, we're going to put them inside to bed or whatever it is whatever they're doing, the kids in the neighborhood. And then the late showing is Warriors. Have you ever seen Warriors? It's like 70s gangs in New York, and there's like the classic scene where the guy's got the bottles and he's clinking his fingers and he's like, Warriors come out to play. And it's like the New York Bronx gang versus the Chiefs, and they all have like different gangs and they fight.
Oh,
you got to see this.
Okay, see, now this is, I need a list.
Yeah,
I need a list.
So you got to see those movies. They're phenomenal. If you're listening and you know what I'm talking about, then I think you might want to come over to my neighborhood because it's going to be awesome.
Nice.
A couple of guys on the Slack channel, they've thrown out Tom Terrific, who always listens to the show. He's watching Doctor Who. You ever watch any of that?
I've tried to, but the thing about that is, it's like, where do I start? Do I go all the way to the beginning? Because I know there's always that kind of like evolution of that show. I'm always intrigued, but I haven't. Like, I need someone to tell me how to get started with it.
And then the other thing they were throwing out is Chef's Table. Have you seen any of that on Netflix?
I haven't.
I think you would like that.
Okay.
Chef's Table it's about, they pick one chef and they do like a mini 45-minute documentary.
Okay.
But it's shot beautifully, like it's gorgeous. It's shot like just very high end and beautiful. So this season 2, the one chef is from Chicago, and he really experiments with taking food to a different level. One of the things he's done is he's filled sugar with helium and serves it as a balloon for a dessert.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Really cool stuff.
Very cool.
He's been, on the best, best chefs in the world list, whatever. But his story is amazing. He ends up getting cancer. He loses all of his taste buds.
Oh, wow.
He regains them. It's an unbelievable roller coaster ride
Really?
of this guy's life.
Okay.
He's amazing. So you got to check out Chef's Table on
Okay.
Netflix. It's
very
awesome.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I would definitely get into that.
It's good. So, well, what about anything? The other thing we talk about here is, we always talk about what are you watching, what are you working on, what are you excited about. So, what are you working on right now? Is there anything that you're doing? Are you on a tour? Are you talking about what do you do as a master of bourbon? Like what's your shtick?
Yeah, I mean, right now it's about I'm living in Louisville. I travel a lot, so I do a lot of I did a lot of like the Blade and Bow parties and launches for that in cities, as well as then one of the big things that we do is educating bartenders and then consumers. So I'm spending a lot of time in Kentucky right now, focused on making sure people are educated on Bulleit and really about the barrel strength coming out. So that's about like trying to do as many seminars and classes as we can.
So you're like a brand ambassador.
Yeah, that's exactly
who goes around and gets people the knowledge they need, get them excited, bring a little romanticism to the experience.
Well, and for us it's really about making sure that education is the foundation for like people appreciating the whiskey. So bringing the right level of education, kind of to sitting down with you and talking about how to taste, and then going through the differences between bourbon and rye, and then like bringing in Scotch whiskey or bringing in and talking about how this category affects everything else, and then how it's how to make drinks or how to order it. All these things are a big part of educating consumers, and then it's about just going and being able to talk to bartenders and give them the right amount of information so that they feel confident when, just like I recommended, you can go out. Right. Anyone that's listening to the show goes out to the bartender. It's like, hey, tell me more about the whiskeys you have. They have to feel like they've got the right amount of information, and I want them to have the right information.
Yeah, well, that's great. And what about as far as what you're excited about? Is there anything we like to feel like Filmmakers Drinking Bourbon brings our listeners exclusive content? Okay. So, is there anything in the hopper? Any teases towards what you guys might be working on in the lab? Anything you're experimenting with?
Well, right now the biggest thing is this barrel strength.
Because, it's all about the barrel strength.
It's all about barrel strength, and it's about the Bulleit Distilling Company in Shelby. So, I mean, those two things are the things to be really excited about for this.
Now, in Shelby, is that a place where the listeners are going to be able to come visit, or is it just strictly where you're making it?
So it's where we're making it. I mean, even though there's a lot of, if you want to come visit for Bulleit Bourbon, the Bulleit Experience at the Stitzelweller Distillery is where to go. That's an official stop on the Bourbon Trail. It's in Shively. You were out there.
Yeah,
right?
it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Come out. You can take the tour. Tom Bulleit's office is right there. You can get educated. You do a tasting. That is our experience. So in a sense, that is our visitor center for Bulleit Bourbon.
Yeah, and those of you listening, because you guys are from all over out there, it's worth the trip. If you are into bourbon, come to Louisville. You can make that your hub, and get a hotel, and then you hop in the car and you hit the trail, and you can go to all these distilleries, all the major ones, everything from Beam to Four Roses to Heaven Hill to Makers, Bulleit. They're all there, and do they still do the passport?
Yep.
There's a little passport where you go to each place and you can get it stamped, and you get like a free cup or a T-shirt at the end of it.
Yeah, it's like a T-shirt.
But so I've done it. It's a lot of fun. I actually did it on motorcycle with my father-in-law. It was nice. Well, we weren't drinking a lot, but we enjoyed the beautiful countryside.
Oh yeah,
horses and then the cool part I always tell people is the smell. Because you're going along from distillery to distillery, and there's this great smell from the storehouses, and it's a lot of fun. So if you ever thought about it, definitely make it happen. It's you could do it in a weekend, fly in, rent a car, do the drive, do the trail. You don't have to even hit them all, but definitely stop by the Bulleit one. They've got a really cool experience there. It's a lot of fun and really unique culture. If you can do it anytime when they're running the ponies, then that's a bonus.
Right.
So that's
100%.
always cool.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of the Derby, that was pretty wild for you guys, right? Like that's always a big event. You guys.
Yeah. Well, it's such an important event for Louisville.
Yeah.
Overall, and then what goes better than horse racing and bourbon? I think.
Yeah.
So
I think it's kind of
born from Kentucky, basically.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's always a big week. There's such tourism that comes through. It's so many people just flooding into Louisville, flooding into Kentucky, all ordering bourbon. You know what I mean? What's cooler than coming to a state and coming to Louisville and you're basically your local, whether it's, other cities, it's like, oh, you got to try this craft beer.
Yeah.
Because they're a beer town. You know what I mean? Whatever it is. You go to Louisville and it's like, all right, well, what bourbons can I get here that I can't get anywhere else?
Yeah.
That's what everyone's looking for, which is why it's so great that right now we're able to have this Bulleit barrel strength and have it just be available just in the state of Kentucky, because it's one of these things you got to come down. You got to come see us.
It's a good thing. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, it's been so much fun chatting with you. But before we wrap up today, I do want to share with you our friends at Tinba are making these awesome camera bags. So on the filmmaking side of things, we always have a partner. This month's partner on the bourbon side is Bulleit. You guys we're drinking all these bourbons. Today we've actually had them all. They're loving them. And next week we'll probably pick one of the remaining ones and finish that bottle off because it's so tasty. But our film partner is Tinba, and they make bags for filmmakers, cameras, lenses, that whole sort of thing. Nice. And we talked to Peter last week, and I asked him, I said I had this great idea. I said, we work with a lot of bourbon brands, and a lot of times they're shipping us, sample bottles or whatever, and they're just wrapped in this bubble wrap, and they're in these cardboard boxes. He makes these bags to keep cameras safe, and I'm like, nice. We need bourbon bags.
Right.
So, you 100%. Know what I mean? So, but if you look at this bag right here, this is the one that we're giving away. We have a giveaway for the month of July. Look at that bag. Tell me you couldn't put in a couple bottles and,
that's perfect.
You know what I'm saying? Transport safely.
That's an ambassador bag right
That's
there.
That's what I'm saying. That's exactly it.
You can fit everything you need in there, from your bar tools to
the whole deal.
Of bourbon.
Yeah. So if you are interested this month, always enter to win the FDB giveaway. You know how to do it. Holler at Tinba Bags, at FDB Podcast. Use the hashtag FDB giveaway. You can enter to win this sweet HDSLR bag. Or if you're a bourbon enthusiast, my guess is you could probably get your bar tools and, the whole line of Bulleit bourbon in that bag. I think would be great. So if you guys are wanting to connect with Bulleit, you can reach out to them on Twitter at Bulleit USA. Is that right?
That's right.
And for those of you, make sure you spell it right. It's Bulleit. So it's not like the weapon. So it's a little different. Make sure, connect with them. You guys always have cool stuff on your feed. Any other ways they can connect with you guys?
You know what I mean? Visiting our website, connecting with us on social at Bulleit USA, I think is great. And then, come see us. I think it's the best thing to do too is find a reason to come to Kentucky.
Definitely. Well, we appreciate you guys out there listening. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. It's been bourbon heavy, Bulleit heavy. I tell you what, this episode to me is definitely a barrel strength episode, full of all the knowledge you need. And I hope that this weekend when you're out and about, if you're going out on the town, when you go to order bourbon, keep some of these things in mind. I think, those around you will realize that maybe you're less of an amateur and more of a professional. So thanks so much for listening. And thanks so much, Doug, for being on the show, man.
Of course, thank you.
And as we always say on the show, cheers.
Cheers.
This podcast was recorded live at Sound Images Studio. Find out more at soundimages.com.